Hi, my name is Daniel Simon. This year marks the 10th anniversary of the anthology Business Architecture Management, Architecting the Business for Consistency and Alignment, which I edited and managed to get published with Springer in 2015. Now, 10 years later, I'm revisiting some of the book chapters with their contributors to reflect on some of the aspects covered in those chapters. Well, and how things evolved until today. Today's session in a series of conversations is with Dave Gray. So, welcome, Dave, and thanks for taking the time to have a chat with me today.
Thanks for having me, Daniel. It's a pleasure.
So, first of all, would you like to give a quick intro of yourself, who you are, well, what you do, what you're passionate about, whatever you like to share about yourself?
Sure, yeah. I've identify as an artist. I went to art school and got very interested in the business world. As a after I was a journalist for about 10 years doing information graphics, infographics describing complex systems and telling stories visually. And I got fascinated by the kinds of complexities and the way that information moves in the business world. And I started a company in the 1990s focused on using information design and information graphics to explore how we could improve business communication by making it more pictorial. And so that got pulled me into a lot of systems, change work, a lot of process work, a lot of technology work. And there's a ton of complexity in how organizations work, the architecture, as you describe it, of a business. And I sold that company about 3 years ago in 2022, but just had a lot of wonderful experiences visualizing information and really helping to drive people's understanding. And when people understand what's going on and they can see it, it's a lot easier to affect change.
Mhm.
So that's a long story of my background.
Okay, well, thanks for
Yeah,
the intro, Dave.
sure.
So, when you indicated you were going to contribute a chapter to the book at the time it, well, all began to take shape, I was really glad to hear that for various reasons, one of which had to do with what you were going to write about, right? Culture.
Yeah.
So in the business architecture space, discussions often revolve around things like capabilities, for example, as kind of the centerpiece of an organization's business architecture. Capabilities are intentionally abstract, yeah, since they are supposed to let us look across the entire organization and the ecosystem in which it operates, figure out what is or might be common across different business units, and to help translate business direction into a coordinated set of changes across any units in the organization being impacted. Well, and when it then comes to questions around how to realize a certain capability we require as an organization, how to improve a given capability, or what makes an organization able to manage customer preferences, design products, or whatever capability we consider, yeah? What makes the organization able to do so particularly well? The dimensions that people tend to look at would certainly include process, people, technology, maybe also some other ones, but it would less likely include culture. And I think, and that was already the case back then, well, more than 10 years ago, culture certainly also has a role to play here and deserves to get more attention in the architecture space. So that was something I was really keen to get addressed in the book. And then I came across a tool, a simple yet powerful tool, the culture map, designed by you, Dave. And it was clear to me there needs to be a chapter on this in the book. Fortunately, you were willing to contribute one.
Yes.
Okay, so I would say before we're going to revisit the culture map, which I'd like to do in this conversation, let's be clear about what we are actually dealing with. So, what is culture at all? Yeah? So, if you try to keep it very simple, I mean, there are, I would say, plenty of definitions out there, yeah? Many of which might seem quite academic. Yeah? How would you define culture? Yeah? Trying to keep it really simple. Yeah? And could you maybe share an
Yeah.
example of culture showing up in an organization?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of there's been a lot of research into culture, a lot of consultants, a lot of interest in that. Some of the people that come to mind, there's a guy named Chris Argyris who did a lot of work in organizational culture. Edgar Schein is another one. These are the probably the two that were foremost in the design of that culture map, their thinking anyway. And one of the simplest and best descriptions I've ever heard is culture is the way we do things around here.
Mhm.
So it's something that often is not formalized or written in rules, but it is something that people assimilate over time. The unwritten rules,
Mhm.
you often don't know what the boundaries or the rules of the culture are until you violate them,
Oh,
because they're not written and they're not
yeah.
explicit. Who speaks up? Who has authority? Who's listened to? Who's ignored? How things happen, how what happens behind the scenes, what
Mhm.
happens in public, what happens above the table, what happens under the table, out of sight, all that kind of stuff
Mhm.
is uh, what I would just call the culture of an organization.
Mhm.
But the quick and easy version is just how things get done around here.
Mhm. Maybe in other words, sort of the, well, typical patterns of behavior in an organization, right?
Yeah,
Well, with
yeah.
respect to how decisions are made, whether or not people tend to take risks, yeah, how people tend to deal with innovation, yeah, or questions around innovation. That's
You could call it the habits and routines of a group. I mean, we all have habits and routines, and we
Mhm.
all have good habits and bad habits. Good
Yeah.
habit might be exercise, eating right. A bad habit might be junk food or smoking or
Mhm.
drinking. So organizations are no different. They're in fact they're even more difficult
Mhm.
to change because they are collective habits.
Mhm.
Even cities have habits. Some cities are very walkable. People are out in the neighborhood walking around and cycling. Some cities are very car oriented. So even cities, have culture, have habits and routines, and these. Um, One of the interesting things that came up in my research is that there's a culture that one of the reasons an aircraft carrier can run is because it has a culture, a lot of unwritten rules. And an aircraft carrier is like a floating city in a lot of ways. And I can't remember exactly what the research was that I came across, but basically you can't take an aircraft carrier and park it and let all the people disembark and then start it up again. It's continuously running like a beehive. You have these people, they have new people coming in every year and people who are leaving every year, but there's always overlap. And so the culture is this of running an aircraft carrier is it's not written down anywhere. There's no manual. It's all contained within the living experience of the people who are operating it. So, and just like if you couldn't just empty out a city for 10 years and then fill it up again, there's all these habits and routines
Mhm.
and things that keep it running.
Mhm.
So although it's unwritten, it's essential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what made you develop a tool then to help explore and well, ultimately map culture. What was kind of the reason for you to do so?
Well, I don't think we can talk about the culture map without talking about this major innovation that I some people call the design canvas, which came about in about around 2010. And that came out of some work by a guy named Alex Osterwalder, who um, I actually trained him in visual thinking. Uh, Even he was already a natural visual thinker, but um, part of what emerged from some collaboration that I had with him was this idea of a design canvas, and he developed something called the business model canvas, which you may
Hmm.
be
Yeah.
familiar with. And I approached him at one point and said to him, Alex, as soon as you have a new business model, you have a culture problem. So I asked him if he would help me develop a
Hmm.
culture map, because as soon as you have a business model, then you have to implement it. You have to actually start thinking about what is the culture required? How are the people going to work together to make this happen? And he very generously gave a lot of his time and attention, and I have to credit him as being one of the authors or creators of that. Um, and it was very interesting. It went through a lot of iterations. I mean, Alex is the design canvas is a powerful concept. It's kind of a hybrid between a business template and software, in the sense that it's a business template, but it's developed like software is developed. It starts with a prototype and it goes through massive rounds of testing and iteration and feedback and improvement. And it was fascinating to go through that process with him.
Hmm.
And I learned a lot about how to create a design canvas. And I think design canvases are incredibly interesting innovation in the business world, because they have a ton of kind of rigor behind them. And while they appear, and as I'm sure you have seen, and others will see if they look at the culture map, very simple on the surface. Um, it's just three boxes,
So,
really.
so
But
should we take a look at it
yeah,
at the
sure.
culture map as it looks like
Yeah,
today, which is slightly different from how it looked like at the time you wrote the chapter, right? So
yeah. So here it is.
you maybe talk a little about those three rows and how they are supposed to be used?
Yeah. So it's very simple. Like I said, the culture is the behavior, the habits, the routines of an organization. So what makes something a design canvas is it's a template, but it also has within it some of the facilitation, the questions that you might ask to work with it. So it's designed to be somewhat self-explanatory. A good canvas will facilitate itself. So in the center panel here are the behaviors. So these are the things, and we have can you see if I can maybe zoom in here? We have some questions here that are designed to help you think about the way things work around here. What does a great day around here look like? What does a terrible day look like? How do we do things? What is a specific example of a typical behavior? Could you describe it as if it were a scene in the movie? And that's about making it tangible and concrete. Can you tell a story about a typical pattern of behavior? How does that make you feel? So this is the center line, the through line. These are the things that are observable, very specific, and you're going to get very, very different answers depending on the group that you talk to. So culture, if you go into a finance group department, you're going to get one set of answers. If you go to a factory, you're going to get, and you talk to people who are on the assembly line, you're going to get very different answers. You've talked to people in the C-suite, it's going to be a different set of answers. And part of culture or mapping is an iterative approach of talking to a lot of groups within an organization. And just like when biologists or environmentalists will study an ecosystem, you can kind of decide where you want to focus your attention. If you have a region that you want to focus on. Just like an environment to a biologist could be anything from an entire biome like the Amazon rainforest, or it could be a single log that you want to look at the life forms around that log. So it's fractal in that way, and I think it can be useful to say, okay, we're just going to look at one region or one department or one factory, one location, one plant where maybe there's something really good happening or something problematic, and just explore what's going on there. That can be really useful. And behaviors, you have things above and below those behaviors. You have above, you have the things that are the results that come out of those behaviors. So because we do things in a certain way, we get these kinds of outcomes. So outcomes are at the top of the map. And so I would think about, you could imagine some vertical columns here where you might work up and down. But outcomes are things like, what are the results? What happens because of our behavior? What are we getting done? What is the impact? These are often top line measures. They're financial. They could be profit. They could be quality. They're the kind of things that you're going to measure at the very top line of the organization. The behavior is stuff that you don't usually measure. But it is how that stuff is happening. And then below, we have enablers and blockers. So these are the things that are either making behavior possible or encouraging certain kinds of behavior or blocking other kinds of behavior. And this is where you really get into at one point in the development, we called this levers, because these are the real things that you can use to manage and improve and change the kinds of the culture within a company. So some are formal and explicit, like rules, incentives, and procedures. Others are informal, unwritten rules, habits, and routines, like I mentioned. So these are the things that we start asking people, why do we behave in the way that we do? What causes or influences those behaviors? What are people, leaders, saying or doing that enable those behaviors? And I find, and one of the things we found is that most often it's what the leaders are doing or saying by example, but it's more doing than saying. So often what people say doesn't match what they do. That's just an unfortunate fact of life. And what leaders might be saying publicly, if it doesn't match what they do, if you say everyone's equal here, but you have a private parking space right by the door, and then your actions aren't matching your behavior. So your walk doesn't match your talk. And that's often the case, even unconsciously. How are people rewarded or punished? How does the physical workspace enable behaviors? What needs are being met? What blocks us from behaving differently? What are the unwritten rules? What's easy to change and why? So that's a quick overview of the whole map. And what
Mm-hmm.
we do when we work through this is usually we go to groups that already have a high degree of trust. So we'll go to a group that already knows each other and works together, and we'll say what I say when I facilitate a group through this map is, I will say, look, we're here to do this project. Uh, we can't guarantee that there's going to be any change or that anything's going to happen, but we're here to find out the best we can what is in the way of doing great work and what is in support of doing great work. And we will guarantee your anonymity. We're not going to reveal um, anyone's information. But what we want to do is we want to get your thoughts, get your experiences, and we're going to take that back up to senior management, and we're going to reflect the truth of how this organization works to them. Now, that doesn't mean that anything's going to happen. We can't make any promises, but what we can promise is that they're going to hear the truth
Mm-hmm.
if you can give us the truth. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really in our best interest and yours to get the real truth. So think of this as a constructive bitch session. This is a chance to tell the stuff that you complain about when you're at lunch, or tell your spouse when you go home at night. the things that are bothering you. This is a chance to get those things constructively on the table and have a chance to see if there can be a possibility of change.
Mhm.
So I set it up that way. Often we'll bring food, or we'll try and create a very comfortable environment for people to talk. And I don't, I usually don't ask those people to do things with sticky notes and that kind of thing. Um, we'll put the thing on the wall and just listen to them and start to try and draw and diagram on this map. Not only what things are happening at each layer, but trying to draw lines for how those things connect. So this is almost like a piece of graph paper that we're listening to stories and we're trying to determine, asking questions, and the kinds of questions you see on the left here. We're asking those kind of
Mhm.
questions to determine, okay, well, what's going on? What is the outcome? And sometimes they're negative, sometimes they're positive. What are the things that are causing that?
Mhm.
So I'll stop sharing at this point.
Okay.
Uh,
Thanks, Dave. So
yeah.
maybe two additional questions based on what you just outlined. First, is the map typically populated, sort of as you indicated, by what results from discussions in a workshop or some other format? Or could it also involve some more, let's say, data gathering and analysis, looking at or trying to better understand typical patterns of behavior in an organization?
I would say it's definitely on the qualitative end of the spectrum. It's very much about storytelling and trying
Mhm.
to understand, because the culture is really what people believe it is. So
Yeah.
it's not necessarily about things you can measure. And that's the whole reason it's so nebulous
Mhm.
in and so hard to quantify in organizations. Although organizations that have a strong culture will talk about it, will focus on it. But even the thing about a culture is that it is a you could almost call it a personality of an organization.
Mhm.
And if you have the personality or the style of working for an organization that works, if it works really well, doesn't mean it's going to work as the environment around the organization changes. And one of my classic examples, a company that I worked with in the early 2000s, is Nokia, celebrated for its wonderful culture, and it did have a wonderful culture. But when the world changed significantly, the culture was unable to adapt from a manufacturing culture into a world that became all about software, and the phone became a platform for software, and the company was really unable to make that leap. It was a
Mhm.
culture, it was a great manufacturing culture, didn't wasn't able to make the leap into software
Mhm.
development.
Which brings me to the second question I
Mm.
wanted to add. So with the use of the culture map, is it to make this really clear, is it essentially about exploring and better understanding sort of the current state culture of an organization or any part thereof? Or would the use of the culture map also involve questions around, well, what collective behavior could help create better outcomes and what in turn could help enable that kind of behavior? So, in other words, would we also want to think about some kind of a target state culture using the map?
Yeah, it's both. I mean, so I think, it's probably, it maybe is obvious from looking at it, but it's very useful as a diagnostic tool. But also, even if you're starting from scratch, you have a startup and you're in the very beginning stages, can be useful as a tool to say, okay, what are the behaviors that we believe will drive success? What are the behaviors what are the outcomes that we want? What kind of behaviors would we need to see? What kind of things can we do to enable the right kind of behaviors and block the behaviors that we don't want to see? And in most cases, most organizations, you're somewhere in the middle. So you're often the culture map becomes a very useful tool when you are noticing changes in the environment and you are recognizing a need for the company to adapt and evolve. So in those kind of cases, you do want to do a pretty deep exploration into what is the culture that we have now and why, and what are the outcomes that we get,
Mhm.
and what are the specific kinds of changes we're seeing in the
Mhm.
environment, how we might change, or
Mhm.
how, so a current state and a future state is often, whenever I have done any kind of culture mapping engagement as a consultant, it's always about, let's first explore the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's going on today, what's working, what's not working, what's problematic, where are some opportunities. Let's we see this need for change in our business. Often there's a new business model or some business process change or some new orientation of the business that's going to require a different kind of approach. And then
Mhm.
what does that need to look like? Now, if you're a heavy smoker, I can help you draw a picture of the problems with that, and also the picture of what it looks like to be a non-smoker. There's still, even after we create these pictures, there's still a lot of work in getting from A to B. And if you're an organization that is got some steeped in some deeply embedded habits and routines um, that are that maybe worked well at one point in time but have
Mhm.
become problematic, um, by no means does that uh, you know make the change easy. It's still an incredibly, just like anyone who's ever tried to change a habit knows how hard that is to do. And if you
Absolutely.
can imagine, 5,000 people trying to quit smoking at the same time, that's probably, akin to what, we're talking about when we're talking about culture
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
The people, there have been some kind of, let's say, strong authoritarian leaders who have shoved through culture change. Gerstner at IBM was one. Jack Welch at GE was another, where they just by pure force of will, kind of like uh, radically, overturned a culture and transformed it. Um, but even in those cases, we can look at those companies now. They kind of reverted back. What the big authoritarian, leader comes in and pushes through a change. There's a reversion to the mean. There's, you know, I think one of the things to be aware of with culture is it has a tremendous amount of inertia and momentum, and it will tend to revert to the mean. Um, you know, uh, China has been a bureaucratic nation back when it was an empire for thousands of years. Now it's a communist nation, but it's still a bureaucrat. I mean, it's basically the culture of the bureaucracy of that country hasn't actually changed that much for thousands of years. So I think you're going to find in organizations, the older, the longer they've been around, the more deeply embedded certain kind of cultural habits and routines are. Um, it's you know Sometimes, and so I think it requires a tremendous, um, uh, it's not an effort that should be undertaken lightly.
Mhm.
It's an effort that should be undertaken, and I think most of the people who have, um, well, Gerstner and Jack Welch both, I think, would say they would not have tried to tackle the culture unless it was absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
And I think that's, it probably has to be an existential kind of um, concern to be worth the effort.
Mhm.
It might be better, like, so let's go back to Nokia. It might have been better to just, they basically sold out of everything else to put 100% focus into mobile phones. Might have been better if they kept making boots and rubber boots and, having, lumber mills and all the other things that they had a lot of diversity in their operations before they went all in on mobile phones. Sometimes it might be better to just actually change the instead of trying to change the culture of the company, to look around for environmental um, things you could do that might actually be aligned with your culture, even if it meant changing your whole operation to do something else, might be easier than changing the culture.
Mhm.
So
Okay, so Dave, what what general, getting back to the culture map itself as a tool to help us deal with
yeah,
culture, what general experiences have you made using the map? What feedback did you receive from others having made use of the map? Are there any particular things worth highlighting? Any, well, let's say success stories to be shared? And also, what people might find particularly challenging when dealing with and trying to map culture. I mean, for example, to create something meaningful using the map, and you kind of indicated this before, I would say, you really need to be honest with yourself, don't you? Yeah. So, any
yeah,
particular experiences that you'd like to share?
yeah. I mean, and I caution people before they embark on a project like this that um, when just going into a company and starting to map what's going on, it creates hope. And so if you can imagine being in the room when I was describing coming in and saying, okay, we want to collect some stuff, we want some thoughts, we're gonna take this back to management, we're gonna share it with them. It creates hope for change. And if and what I tell the executive team, before we even start on a project like this, I say, look, you're gonna uh, by going in and asking these questions, we're going to create hope for change. And I can almost guarantee you that when we come back and we show you what is going on in this organization, you're going to see some things that you don't like. And you're going to probably see some things reflected about yourself that you're going to maybe want to argue with, or maybe feel misunderstood. You're going to, perhaps feel that people are misinterpreting your actions. This is a mirror. And the culture of an organization is almost always a reflection of not only your good and hopeful nature, but your shadow. And so you're going to be seeing, this is a little bit like therapy. You're going to be seeing and hearing your own actions reflected back to you in a light that probably is going to be unflattering and maybe difficult to hear. So if you're not ready for that, if you don't want that, if you're not ready to hear uncomfortable truths, and you're not ready to actually, if you think that the culture change is other people's problem, that they're going to have to change their behavior and you're not going to have to change yours, um, then this is not the kind of project that you
Mhm.
should be undertaking.
Mhm.
So as leaders, you know, if you want other people to change their behavior, you're going to have to change your habits. If you want, and whatever that means, we don't know till we actually go in and start asking the questions. But this is something that is, it is, uh, it may be unconscious, you may be completely unaware of it, but there are probably things that you're doing that are creating the problems that you want to solve.
Mhm.
And so it's a kind of exercise that requires a uh, a willingness to reflect
Mhm.
um, uh, on your leadership style, on your approach, and be willing to to change. And
Mhm.
that is probably going to mean doing things that are uncomfortable and new, and probably doing them in public. So it will probably require a lot of vulnerability and um, So that is something that and then then sometimes people actually are willing to do it, and then there all kinds of interesting things can happen when that willingness is there.
Mhm.
But I've learned to just say no if people aren't willing to entertain
Mhm.
those notions.
Okay, well, then maybe approaching the end of our little conversation, to conclude, from my side, yeah, based on what we touched on, I would say, well, again, to everyone in the business architecture space and beyond, let's not forget that culture, although it might be, as you highlighted, Dave, challenging to deal with, yeah, it does have a role to play in making an organization capable of achieving certain things and in increasing the odds of an organization's success, if you want to put it that way. And from an architectural point of view, I think it's particularly worth noting that culture may not necessarily be uniform, at least across a very large organization, right? And it may also well have different facets, some of which might be more relevant to one capability than to another. Is that something that you would agree with, Dave? Any other
Yeah,
final thoughts you would like to share? Any
yeah. Well,
particular takeaway messages?
we've focused a lot of energy on a big change today, and that's often when culture becomes highlighted when big change is necessary. But I think it's also important to recognize culture is too important to ignore. And culture is kind of the operating system, the informal operating, human operating system of a company. And um, it's kind of like it does require some effort. Even a good culture requires effort to kind of maintain it. And I think of it like a kind of like a landscape or a garden. Um, you you can't control the landscape. It's not a machine. It's something that will grow organically. And if you have a yard and you ignore it, um, it's going to continue to grow and evolve, and things are going to happen, and things are going to grow there, and animals are going to come and live there or whatever. And so if you're not paying attention to it, it's just like having a yard. If you want to have a good culture, it does require you to pay attention to it, to maintain it, to know what is valuable and what is problematic, and to be kind of maintaining it, trimming, pruning, connecting. And a culture map can be a really useful tool, especially when you have a good culture and you know the things that are working and you know what you want to maintain. A culture map can be a really useful kind of picture to have on the wall, to be aware of as you make tweaks and changes, as we do as a business evolves, to be aware of kind of its state, to kind of keep yourself aware of its state. And we didn't talk much about that as a maintenance tool, because I think, generally speaking, when people come, it's because their yard is a mess, you know, and they have ignored it for a long period of time. And at that point in time, it does become a major kind of landscaping problem. But it's much better if you want to, and I think you can use the design canvas for a culture map as a tool for that, to kind of keep your house in order, so to speak. And I think um, that's something I'd like to see more people do, more organizations do.
Well, and I think that's a very nice way to conclude. So thank you very much, Dave. That was really insightful. Thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me. Really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.